It was a big goal of mine this year to be able to grow about 3 years supply of hot peppers for my family, as well as growing about a year's supply of sweet peppers. And I did this because mainly we're not a big spice family, so for us, growing 3 years supply of hot peppers is not really a huge feat. And in fact, I only grew, I believe, about 8 plants of spicy peppers to cover those 3 years. And I'm going to show you later on in the video how we're going to preserve it so that they actually last 3 years. But sweet peppers, on the other hand, we eat a lot of, and I grew about 25 pepper plants of just sweet peppers in order to supply 1 year. And I'm glad I did, because I did do 12 different varieties this year to see which ones would have done the best. And unfortunately, this must have just been a really bad year for peppers, because I did not get nearly as many sweet peppers this year as I did last year. But the hot peppers did amazingly well. Either way, I'm glad I did so many plants, because I did hit my goal of being able to grow all of the hot peppers we're going to need for 3 years. And I did reach my goal of having a year's supply of the sweet peppers, although, like I said, I had 25 plants. That's a lot of plants to supply a year's supply of peppers. The patch of plants that we're looking at right here are the actual hot peppers, and I'm clipping off right there the Anaheim chili peppers. I also have the purple cayenne pepper. This one is super hot, so if you really like hot peppers, this is the pepper for you. On top of that, it was incredibly productive. Hundreds of peppers on 2 plants, and it's producing another round here in the dead of summer, and they are just beyond spicy, beyond spicy. They're almost too spicy for us. Besides those 2, I'm also growing Poblanos, which is a more mild spicy pepper. That's more our kind of style of pepper. And then the early jalapeno and a giant jalapeno, 2 different kinds of jalapenos. Those are also pretty mild, especially if you pick them while they're young. Peppers are cool because they're one of those plants that you can really harvest at any stage. I prefer harvesting mine at a very early stage because they tend not to be as spicy if you harvest them when they're young or before they've changed colors. If you're really into spice, or you're really into, you know, the sweetness of a pepper, when we're talking about sweet peppers, you do kind of want them to stay on the plant long enough that they change colors. And they change to all different colors, and sometimes they go through 2 or 3 color changes. So most of them, not all, but most of them will start out with a green color. Unlike these purple cayennes right here, they actually start out purple and then they turn red. But most peppers will go from a green to a yellow and then to a red or an orange color. And that's kind of how you know they're ripe. But the cool thing about peppers is you can harvest them at any of those stages. I like to personally pull them early because they're more mild of a taste, and since we're sensitive to spice, that helps me. But then also I like to do that because when you take a pepper off of a plant before it's fully ripe, that means that the plant is going to try to put out another flush of flowers because it has not reached its maturity that it's trying to aim for. The plant's whole goal is to produce seeds so that it replicates itself. And so if you allow a pepper to go to complete maturity, that kind of tells the plant, hey, I can stop producing peppers because I have reached my goal of having a mature pepper that has the right seeds to be able to reproduce myself. If I take them off while they're immature, the pepper plant will try to produce another round, and that just means more peppers for us, which is awesome. I've been growing years' supplies of peppers for many years now. And when it comes to hot peppers here in Florida, it is very, very easy to grow these. If you live in a hot climate, they really just absolutely love it. They love all the sunshine. You can give them a true full days of sun, and they do not care. They thrive in those particular conditions. Now, sweet peppers, on the other hand, are a little bit different. They're a little bit more sensitive to all of the sunlight I get down here. They're a little more sensitive to the extreme heat we have during the summer. You know, they also are not super keen on being watered excessively, and we get a ton of rain here. So you usually try to get your sweet peppers towards the beginning of the season, and then your hot peppers can continue into the summer. Now this little sad patch right here is actually my patch of sweet peppers. And for the sweet peppers, I have and I'm probably going to butcher all of these names, so I will put them down into the description, but I have Cachucha, Numex, Suave, Ajvarski, Dulce, Cubanelle, Yellow Monster, Paprika, Pimento, Yolo, Keystone, Arroz Compolo, Criolla de Concina. Those are all of the peppers I'm growing. In previous years, I have had wonderful, wonderful success with Cubanelle, Paprika, and Pimento. Those have always done exceptional for me, and they did okay this year. Probably the one that did the best was the Pimento. That one produced a significant amount, and in fact, most of the peppers that I have for the year are going to be the Pimento, and the Pimento and the Paprika tend to be like my sweetest peppers. They are exceptional, and if you can let them go to that red color, they are really, really good. Now, Cubanelles are also really good. They usually produce a lot. I've never actually had a year where they haven't been extremely productive. This year, they were just okay. Once again, I think this is an environmental situation. I'm not really sure what happened with our climate this year that my peppers were not completely exceptional. The Cubanelles did okay. Cubanelles are very much remind me of like a green bell pepper. They are just standard, normal peppers. No big deal, nothing fancy there. But they do produce usually in abundance. Now, all the other ones that I mentioned are pretty new to me. I've grown the Keystone and the Yolo with just minimally success in the past. I wanted to do them again this year just to see if that was the same thing. The Dulces did very good, but they are a smaller pepper. And the Cachucha was also pretty decent, but once again, smaller pepper. I'm looking for size and volume. All the rest of them just did okay. I probably maybe got 3 or 4 peppers off of each plant, which is less than ideal. But, you know, it was fun to grow all these peppers and see all the different varieties and the different tastes. But I'm probably going to go back to my standard Cubanelle, Paprika, Pimento. There's also one other one that I didn't grow this year that I really should have, which is the Lesya. That one I particularly like because of its sweetness. Now, besides the peppers, we are going to harvest a couple other things today. We're going to harvest some beans because we are going to go inside and we are going to make a very amazing recipe with these peppers. We're going to use both the sweet peppers and we're actually going to use some hot peppers, which is very unlike me, but this is the one recipe that I use a significant amount of hot peppers, which is chili. Now, I know, especially in Texas, for my viewers in Texas, you are probably going to look at me and say, hey, it is not okay to put beans in your chili. I guess this is just the way I was raised. We have beans in our chili. I know that that is definitely blasphemy in some chili cultures to put bean in your chili, but we're going to do that today. If you're not a fan of beans in your chilies, no worries. You can totally not include that in this recipe. So the beans that I grew a cranberry bean, which is probably one of my favorite beans to grow because it's just so pretty. It's like a pink and white bean, and it's really just adorable. I grew some brown and some white lima beans, and I also have some cannelloni beans in this little patch here. Besides those 3, I usually also grow kidney beans, small red beans, cowpeas, particularly whippoorwill cowpeas that kind of look like pinto beans. And then I also grow black beans, particularly the Puerto Rican black bean, which is normally a summer plant. We're not going to be harvesting that today. This patch right here is ready, and I usually like to take my beans off of the plant before they are brown and crispy, because here in Florida, where it's very, very rainy this time of year, those beans will mold very, very quickly. So once they start getting that like paper-like quality, and they're kind of a little leathery, but they're changing colors, that tells me that it's time to pull them, and then they'll store well that way. I will shell them out of their pods, and then I'll lay the beans out on the table for about 3 to 5 days just to allow them to completely dry before I put them into glass containers. Chili is normally made with like a ground beef, but I was going through my freezer. I'm in this big mode of trying to get rid of everything that's in my freezer from my spring harvest. I'm making a pretty good dent, but one of the things I had in my freezer that I needed to get rid of was some of these steaks. We got these on sale, I think, and they just were not great. They're not our favorite. And so whenever you have a meat that is not your favorite, I like to cook it for an extended period of time, and that usually will break down the meat so that it's more tender. And I thought this was a great opportunity for me to use up some of those steaks, and instead of making a ground beef chili, I'm going to make a steak chili. So the first thing I did was I got rid of a bunch of the fat off the steak. And that's important because my plans for some of this chili is to freeze dry it. And you can pretty much freeze dry almost anything. But the thing that you've got to take into account when you're freeze drying something is the amount of fat that's in it. Because if you have an excessive amount of fat, it is not going to store as well when you freeze dry it. So taking off as much of the fat as possible is helpful in this process. So I did cut off most of the fat on these steaks, and now I'm chopping it into small pieces. Now that we have that all chopped up, I'm going to put this in my pot and allow it to start cooking. I'm also going to take 2 of my yellow onions that I grew this year. These are, I believe they're Texas Early Sweets. These are the last 2 yellow onions that I have. I still have my white and I still have my red. Those have a little bit longer of a storage, so I have been using these yellow ones first. But these were exceptional. I love them so much. They just don't last that long, which is unfortunate. But this is great because we're going to use it in this recipe. We're going to get those onions used up, and we're going to preserve them in this chili that we're going to also freeze dry. So we're going to get these onions into the pot with the meat. It's about half cooked, the meat is. And now I'm going to add all my spices. I'm going to use some freeze-dried garlic, but you can also use dehydrated garlic. I'm going to do salt, pepper, onion powder, and the onion powder is also freeze-dried, but once again, dehydrated is perfectly fine. I'm going to add a lot of cumin. Cumin is giving that chili vibe, you know, that taste of chili. And even though I'm going to be adding a lot of peppers to this, I'm also going to add a little bit of cayenne pepper powder. Now here's our peppers. I have 2 bags. The first one here is my sweet peppers, and I'm going to put about 2 or 3 handfuls of sweet peppers into the pot. And now this next bag here is the hot peppers. I started out with 1 handful of hot peppers, but as the day went on, I mean, this cooked for probably about 4 to 6 hours. I ended up adding about 3 or 4 more handfuls of the hot peppers because it just wasn't at any level of spice that I wanted. And about 4 handfuls was perfect. Here are the beans that I'm using. These are my small red beans that I like to use. I soaked them overnight. I put them in a bowl of water and then just kind of let them puff up overnight. And now I'm going to throw them in the chili very early on because they are going to need a couple hours to cook. We're going to mix all that up together. The meat does not need to be completely cooked at this point. It's going to cook in the sauce for the rest of the day. I'm adding my tomatoes. I normally can my own tomatoes, but I ran out of canned tomatoes, so I definitely need to make more this year. I still have a ton of bags in my freezer that I can make into canned or diced tomatoes, but I had a couple cans that I had bought at the store, so we're going to use that up first. I also threw in a bunch of cherry tomatoes. You can probably see them there. But I threw in a bunch of cherry tomatoes because I am just overwhelmed with cherry tomatoes these days. And then every hour or so, I would take a spoonful of the sauce to see how it tasted. And this is when I started to notice I needed a little more salt, a little more cumin, and then I added those, 4 handfuls full of hot peppers. And it turned out absolutely amazing. I was super excited about it. It was so good. And I was even more excited that we are going to freeze dry this so that we have it whenever we want it. Now you can chili as well, including with the beans, but I wanted to freeze dry it because I didn't want to have to follow a specific recipe. One of the many reasons why I love freeze drying versus canning sometimes is that canning, you do have to follow a very tested and methodical recipe. It cannot be your own. You have to follow, certain rules so that way it's safe. But with freeze drying, because of the way that it preserves food, you don't have to follow a recipe. You can pretty much use whatever. taking into account that you just have to be concerned with the amount of fat that is in your recipe. So I have my freeze dryer trays here. I have a medium pro Harvest Right freeze dryer, and this one I believe says that you can put up to 2.5 pounds of product onto each tray, each of the 5 trays. I don't like to hit the limit, so I did 2 pounds. So I measured it out there with my little kitchen scale to make sure that I was not overweighting the trays. My main thought with freeze drying this stuff is I think it would be so much fun that when we go on our next trip, we're probably going to be going in the winter on our next RV trip, and I think it would be awesome to have some freeze-dried chili that we can throw on, you know, a little pot on the campfire as we're camping. And it, you know, since we're going to be out in colder weather, like this is just like the epitome of camping food, right? Chili. Nice, hot, warm while it's freezing outside. I cannot wait to try this. Besides the chili that we're doing, I'm also going to be freeze drying these peppers. Earlier we talked about how I wanted to grow a 3-year supply of hot peppers. And normally canning the peppers will last you for probably about 5 years if you wanted to, but then you have to usually pickle them or something. I didn't want to pickle them. I wanted to maintain this hot heat that I could use in any recipe. And so I wanted to freeze dry them. Freeze drying hot peppers should last 30 years. So we can use these over the next, 3, 5, 10, 30 years. I don't think they're going to last 30 years, but I suspect that they're going to last us about 3 years. But this means I don't have to grow hot peppers every year. And this is especially important to me because I want to narrow it down to just a few peppers that I'm growing, or a few types of peppers that I'm growing every single year. That way I can save the seeds. Peppers and tomatoes are like notorious for cross-pollination, and you end up with a different tomato or a different pepper than what you intended to grow when you save the seeds. And when you grow hot and sweet peppers together and they cross-pollinate, you tend to end up with a hot pepper. And since we're much more into sweet peppers, I didn't want to get into this situation where I'm constantly having this cross-pollination issue. So growing all of my hot peppers in 1 year, and then for all future years, or the next 2 to 3 years, I can grow just my sweet peppers, just the varieties I really love, and they won't cross-pollinate because I'm growing minimal varieties and they have less of a likelihood of cross-pollinating. So it has been about 40 hours. The chili took the longest. The hot peppers were ready in probably, I think it was like 18 hours. But because of the high water content in the chili, that took the full 40. And the way that I check to make sure that these are done is I weigh my trays. So I weigh them when they come out, and I leave them, and I keep putting them back in the freeze dryer until the weight doesn't change. That tells me that there's not liquid coming off of this anymore, so it's not removing any more water. So once it's no longer removing any more water, that kind of tells me that I have reached the right point of being able to package these up. So I'm packaging these in Mylar bags because, once again, we are going to be using this on camping trips. It's a lot easier just to pour some hot water into a Mylar bag, and also it's very easy to carry these Mylar bags versus carrying glass jars in an RV that kind of bounces around. Once I've got them all in the bags, I'm going to put in some oxygen absorbers to keep them nice and fresh, and then we're going to seal them with this heat sealer. This came with the Harvest Right freeze dryer. It works really well for me, and I'm actually sealing it in 2 spots. So I seal it first once, and then I flip it over and I seal it a second time. I'm just trying to make sure that I get a really good seal because these are needing to last for several years. This Harvest Right freeze dryer has really just opened our world to this new preservation method that I can't even stop talking about how much I love it. I love the way the food comes out. I love that you don't have to follow a recipe. I love that there's so much hands-off time. This is like right up my alley when it comes to preservation. I still love canning. I do. But canning, it's a lot of weight. It's a lot of jars. It's a lot of space. It takes up a lot. Now for the hot peppers, I am actually going to put them in a glass jar. These are not traveling with us. You can fit a lot in one jar. I kind of even crushed them down a little bit so that they all fit in that half-gallon jar right there. Now, to make sure that they last long, I am going to put an oxygen absorber into this jar, and I am going to vacuum seal the jar shut because I do want this to last 3 years. Now, if you wanted them to last the full 30, you're probably going to want to use a Mylar bag. That is the more appropriate thing to use when you're going for the full preservation time. So we put our lid on, add this little vacuum sealer. It's okay. I also have another vacuum sealer through Food Saver that does this as well. I probably should have pulled that out, but this will work. Now, because we have all that wonderful chili, I need to make a meal with it, and I'm going to make chili mac. So I'm just adding some elbow pasta, and then to top my chili, I'm going to add some chopped onion that I saved from the onions we chopped earlier, and then some cheese. I hope you guys had fun hanging out with me today in the garden harvesting all of these wonderful peppers. I really had fun with you. Now we're going to curl up on the couch, watch a good movie, and enjoy some warm, comfy chili mac. Happy gardening, guys, and happy preserving.